Hello everyone, it's Oliver Harper here and I'm back with a new audio commentary, and Tim Partridge is back with me to discuss LifeForce. How you doing, Tim?
Hi Oliver, I'm fine thank you. How are you?
I'm good. I think this is probably Canon Films' best movie. Some may disagree, but me and Tim are going to go talk about the film's production, and Tim's going to share some comparisons to the book, which he read recently, which is going to be quite interesting. But anyway, if you wish to sync up your own copy of the movie by seeking up the commentary, put the timestamp to 0 and press play now. Now, I didn't see this movie growing up. I'd experienced many other Canon films, but this one I randomly discovered on Laserdisc, early 2000s. And the cover looked amazing. It's a Japanese poster to it. It's a Japanese version. And I was kind of blown away by it. I was thinking, I've never heard this movie, and it had all these kind of big names to it, especially on production team as well. I was just kind of like, okay, I was like, right, this is my favourite Canon movie, easily. I mean, Tim, had you seen it way before me on like tape or TV?
I saw it in 1998. Actually, SFX magazine in the UK, they had done some soundtrack giveaway thing on a CD, and LifeForce was one of the themes that they had, musical themes that they had in it. And it was by Henry Mancini, who I loved because of the Pink Panther, and Basil the Great Mouse Detective, and many other great films, and with beautiful score. And this was it was a beautiful theme, and then I think I read about it. I think something had come in Empire magazine, just mentioning it in the Forgotten VHS section. So it kind of looked like it was just this film, this kind of video nasty sort of thing that time had forgotten. And anyway, I eventually saw a copy of it in Canada, and it was the American cut, where they'd cut the film down significantly, and they'd had that Michael Kamen score, which is mostly kind of synth ambience over the top of it. And it just doesn't work because of the cuts that were made.
Couldn't shrunk down the opening, didn't they?
But then I saw it in 1999 on Channel 5 in the UK, and it was the full version. And like you, I was just blown away. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's an inherently very silly film. It has incredible amounts of problems. It has inconsistent acting. It has a story that is really fun but really doesn't make sense. It's unintentionally really sexist and offensive in places without realizing it is. It's dated in many ways. Yet, saying all of that, I think Tobe Hooper was given, what was the budget, 30 million?
I think just under that, about 25.
He directed the hell out of it. I mean, it is a beautiful, beautiful looking and sounding film. And it just goes to show you, I mean, you can't completely upgrade a bad movie with the direction, but he gets very close. And so I think it's got some of the most stunning camera work and visuals I've ever seen. Actually, there's points in it where I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, this is so goofy and silly. And then there's points in it where I've got goosebumps and I can't hear anything around me because I'm just zoned in on it. And I'm like, literally jaw hit the floor. Wow, that's unironically amazingly impressive.
When I first saw it, it felt a bit like a Roger Corman movie, kind of spoofing Alien to a certain degree at the beginning, because it all seems a little bit like kind of, it's moving along at a very quick pace. Oh, we find this thing. Are we going to go here, get in the outfits and stuff, these spacesuits, and go into the ship, which looks like a giant penis, as they keep saying on the making of, but it's more just kind of weird long thing with kind of tentacles at the end. But yeah, I mean, as soon as you see a visual effects of a high quality, thanks to John Dykstra, and I don't think it was a 70mm kind of effects job, was it? Or maybe 65?
It's VistaVision.
VistaVision, yeah. So yeah, I mean, it was obviously clearly kind of inspired by Alien, but also had zombies in it, and and it was set in England. That's what kind of sort of blew my mind, was seeing London, get destroyed.
Because we didn't see when we were growing up. I think it's changed now because you see things like Paddington. What's the film with Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt?
Oh, Edge of Tomorrow.
Edge of Tomorrow. I mentioned Paddington, even though it's not sci-fi, but just London as a character, as a place that you see in big movies. We just didn't see that growing up at all.
No, it was that, or it was TV shows, or you'd see kind of the rom-coms kind of use London as this kind of setting. but not for science fiction.
No, not for the big budget effects movie.
Yeah, that's what really impressed me, and it felt like such a special movie. And as Tim was pointed out a little bit earlier, where it's got its problems, and it's got like a sort of a middle act kind of like lull, I think, where it loses a bit of its energy. I think how it all starts out and how they kind of enter the ship, which is very, again, inside very Giger-esque, which I think it was science fiction at that point in the 80s you couldn't really get away from, because they all seemed to just love it, and I love that sort of, kind of a biomechanical design.
Yeah, well, the thing is, having read the book, and it's an experience reading the book, and it's difficult. But with that, at the beginning, it starts off kind of similarly to what you see in the film. But Halley's Comet isn't in it. That was something that was added by Tobe Hooper. And the whole thing of the European Space Agency, that's not in it. It's set in 2080, I believe. And it's in the future. It's this future version of the world, I guess. And so you have this kind of expedition by these astronauts who'd been in space, and they're all male, by the way. In this film, you can see that they're...
I think it's 2 females, I think.
Yeah, but it's a kind of mixed gender voyage to wherever, whereas it's very much male, and yet so they end up going inside of this giant... It's like a cathedral, basically.
Wow.
And it's got paintings on the wall that move, but they're not paintings, but they kind of look like it. And everything's miles and miles. There's miles of space in between things, and this is very different to that. And they only find like a bald man in there, in this kind of area that's kind of like behind protected glass or something. But it's massive. It's not just like a coffin. This is all very scaled down, and I think in doing that, in the scaling down, and for whatever reason, Tobe Hooper deciding to make it more cathedral, although he has bats in this, which allude to vampire legend and everything else, which, from what I remember, weren't in the book. So it's this. He's taken some elements and changed them, but I think just having a haunted house in space, pretty much makes you think of Alien. And also remember, he'd grown up with things like Planet of the Vampires, Mario Bava, who I think is very much an influence in this film. But it's very different setup, and it isn't this thing where they all get kind of killed off and then one person ends up coming to London. Actually, the opening's very quick in the book, and it uses a lot of the same characters, but they're renamed, or you don't see them as often frequently. So it's a different kind of affair. And this all this stuff was shot at Elstree Studio. The film was mainly based at Elstree Studios, and all this stuff. There's no optical work here. This is apart from like long shots where you see the astronauts all going through the interior of this.
The opticals were sort of done in America, yeah.
Yeah, they're all done by Apogee, John Dykstra's company.
I think with the combination of the Alien kind of setup, also you got the zombies, but you got vampires, and that was probably the most intriguing element for me, was kind of 3 kind of elements that sort of fit together to make this kind of one piece, where I don't tend to find, vampires and then zombies kind of a part of it. As you say, the sort of in the book, they weren't. You said they were sort of like weird creatures, weren't they? They weren't.
They're humanoid, but when they come to Earth, it's all kind of done differently. They're all stored in a different place. At that time in the early 80s, I mean, as I say, things had changed. There was the European Space Agency by then, and there was... that came in 1985, but there were things like there was the proposed Space Station Freedom, and the idea of like joint American-British voyages and things. That was a thing that was talked about on the horizon. I believe Thatcher kind of got rid of that. So it's more kind of its time in the movie, but yeah, in the book. Coulson actually in this film, he starts off. You see him at the beginning. You know nothing about him in the film. Absolutely nothing. He's got no. You don't even know what food he likes, or there's literally no character development. I think Tobe Hooper, when he read the book, because it is the idea of people going into space and some kind of alien force being brought back, having grown up watching and loving the Quatermass experiment. Which you've seen as well. I think he just saw that and he just went, you know what?
I'm going to make that.
We're making that. And interestingly, straight after this film, as part of his 3-picture deal with Cannon, because he made this, then he made Invaders from Mars, which is a remake of the William Cameron Menzies movie from the 50s, which he loved. And he talks about that, how passionate he is about it. The images from that film burned into him, and he recreates a lot of the visuals in his remake of the film of that. And I just wonder, why didn't he just make a straight remake of the Quatermass experiment?
Well, yeah, I suppose that this resulted in that, I suppose. But it's instead of having, it's just without the name, isn't it? With a few other bits kind of cobbled onto it. I mean, because LifeForce, as the film itself is written by Dan O'Bannon and Jacoby. Steve Jacoby.
Don Jacoby.
Don Jacoby, sorry, yes. Just famously on Alien. So I don't know. I mean, also they've changed. Either they'd had written something that was very much a piece from the book, and it's been altered by Tobe Hooper, or they've kind of changed things, to suit his new narrative.
Yeah, I mean,
that's kind of slightly unclear of what they'd changed, or Dan O'Bannon had changed.
Yeah, they'd really ground. I mean, they changed pretty much. They took the essence of everything. The 2 scenes that really stay the same are basically the bits with the woman who meets Ned Price, the guy in the car in the countryside. That's pretty much the same. And also when they meet that nurse as well, Ellen Donaldson, when you meet her, that's all word for word. They even have some of the same clunky dialogue. Is literally word for word. This stuff here, by the way, the wide shots when you see the vampire creatures standing, they are mannequins. They're not actually them.
Because you've got the camera goes upside down, so
and they're sealed as well, so they're not able to get out. But it's all a forced perspective set that's made by the art department under John Graysmark, and it's wonderful. I mean, if you look at all those little crystals at the top, they're all like just tiny little forced perspective pieces. It's
incredible. It's an incredible set piece.
Amazing piece of craftsmanship.
And also you got the Superman team doing the wire work, which one of the gentlemen said they're wearing Chris Reeves' harness.
Yeah, but when they've in the book, right, when the astronauts come in, they're all male, and it makes a point that they hadn't seen a woman in
2 years.
2 years, yeah. So they're sort of implying that they're kind of maybe a little sex hungry and anyway, there's lots of elements in the book like that because I was trying to work out, when I watched this film, it just feels out of time. It really doesn't feel like, and it doesn't feel like it really has anything to say. There's elements of things that it's trying to say, but when you hear Tobe Hooper talking about it, he says, it's a relationship between men and women and how it can turn, or it's about the feminine terror, or whatever, and he talks about the book being less emotional than the film, and maybe in his head, that's what he thought. I've got to make this more emotional, or whatever. But when I read the book, even though the book's a complete mess and is really difficult to read, in my opinion, I feel that the book, because there's more human elements in it, there's more things like, for example, actually, before we go to that, before I mention that, I just want to say here, after this shot, of the spaceship coming down, we pointed this out to you before, when you see Bukowski standing at the window, if you look at the reflection of the radio room the satellite room he's in, that's a still photograph that's been blown up and then reflected into the glass.
Yeah.
If you look at the people,
crazy.
They're not moving.
It's really clever how they've done that.
That's John Graysmark. That's the ingenuity of him. But yeah, no, there's things just like, for example, when they come back to London, it's springtime. In spring, that gives connotations of mating and nature and all that kind of thing. There's bits where people are stopping and thinking about the birds and the bees and that kind of thing. I mean, there's a bit where literally there's a bit. I know this is like, the other thing about this is a very English London-centric movie, and it feels very much almost a bit Sherlock Holmes.
Well, to me, it felt like you got this you got a movie that's surrounded by really impressive visual effects and some nice set pieces. But once you sort of find yourselves grounded in reality in London or whatever, it feels like they're just filming like inside the BBC or something in like the corridors, or like even Elstree themselves. Just using that as a sort of location, and it just felt like it did feel like a sort of, well, you could say Sherlock, but a somewhat TV movie-esque moments where you've got just in these kind of very much unexciting offices. You know what I mean? And then I spent a lot of time with in those places until you sort of have a big moment when the vampires escape. But I didn't think that was a flaw about it. I just kind of thought that was always interesting that this kind of big movie had those elements in it that made it sort of, instead of being this kind of really sort of elaborate, it was just very much, no, this is kind of reality to it all.
And it's really odd as well, because it's a film set mostly in London. And it's filmed at a studio that's just in North London, yet they didn't do any filming on the streets of London.
No, they just made a backlot, didn't they, of London's, of like London streets, didn't they?
And then filmed in miniature at Christchurch, an abandoned model village. John Dykstra and his team coming over from California and shooting a model village in Christchurch. I think that's the surrealist thing you can think of.
Bizarre.
But to create all those exteriors, I mean, the only thing is they shot like at Barnet House, which is 15 minutes away from Elstree, and Alexandra Palace as well later on. But they're all local to Elstree. It's very much, as you say, kind of filmed nearby, and I had like family members who were in the civil service at this time, and all the stuff in the research place looks very much like how I remember the civil service looking at the time. But yeah, there's a lot more. I mean, Coulson in the book, he has a wife and he has 2 children, and the ideas that Hooper's trying to play with, I guess, and that you can kind of see in the book about, which I guess kind of nods back to just a vampire legend in general, between, it's like dominance of 2 people, but I mean, I found in the book it's like this predatory line that's between kind of 2 people courting and kind of sharing each other in a relationship, and kind of becoming one, like kind of power imbalance. And they do that in the book with things like, I mean, in here it's the idea of like energy just being in people coming and going, but it's in the book it's more kind of specific, it's more particular. It's more like the idea that you can, I mean, they do these things where they use like these electric meters to measure the the energy, I guess, the life force inside 2 things. And there's one bit where they get like an eel and an octopus, and they stick it in a tank, and they're measuring like the the levels, I guess, of life force or whatever it is. And at one point the eel bites into the octopus, and takes a chunk out of it and eats it, and all of a sudden they've got the same number that matches. And the point is they're trying to make is that they're passing on their life energy to each other, kind of thing. And like, I mean, there's a miniature there of Big Ben, and that's Barnet House in North London. But yeah, it's this kind of, it's really weird and abstract and not specific. And I sort of feel it's like a product basically of the 60s sexual revolution. It feels like some baby boomer on on drugs who's been just enjoying themselves in the 60s and seeing the sexual revolution. And they make observations too in the books, just stuff like I mentioned before about it's springtime or whatever, but you see there's things like young women are wearing transparent short outfits where you can see their underwear, and just all these little things that kind of make I guess like make straight men, they give them that instinct, and there's a lot to to go on with it, but it doesn't feel in this that it's really zooming in. It's really honing in on one specific thing it's trying to say, and it becomes quite. The only female really character that you have in this film is Matilda May's vampire, and you have at the beginning, as I say, it's a shared you have some women astronauts, but then later on, there's a couple of women, one of whom kind of gets treated like a piece of meat, and the other one's just a corpse.
Yeah.
So that feels sort of quite problematic in itself.
So ultimately, you've got a movie that is very much taken little elements from the book, and really kind of formed its own thing. And as you said, it's as Tobe Hooper is obsessed with sort of Quatermass. He's kind of just made that. Take those elements and put it into Quatermass. It's like episode 4 of Quatermass or whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah. So it's and with Railsback, could be Quatermass himself, or essentially the British naval guy.
Yeah, Kane, who is barely in the book. I think he's in like half a page of the book, if I remember correctly.
But the British guy, he could have easily been Doctor Who at some point. The actor, is brilliant in the film.
There's a Doctor Who vibe, isn't there?
For him, definitely, yeah. He just needs a scarf. It'd be sorted. Yeah, Matilda May. I mean, obviously to many guys, this was like, oh my god, the biggest selling point in the movie was just an incredible physique and stuff, and she is, stunning. 18 years old, and didn't speak much English, but there's debate on that, how much she knew. But obviously ballerina, come from France, and I think they auditioned like over 140 women, and she got the part.
Right.
It's crazy. But I think she did a bunch of movies after this, but I think mainly in French, but she didn't really pop up in anything other big English-speaking movies, as far as I'm aware.
She's in a film. I saw her in a French film about 30 years ago. She's a really good actor. But as I was saying, the book has this kind of, it's very hippie, very psychedelic hippie. That's what it kind of feels like. There's a scene where they go to Sweden, and it goes on forever, where they meet this count who's got these 3 kind of, I don't want to call them just girl followers, young women, and the idea is that they help give him energy. You get energy from sexual attraction from young people.
This movie has that. I mean, it's more just like kissing someone. Well, she doesn't even kiss them sometimes, where she takes bits of LifeForce by kissing the protagonist, but to take out someone quickly, she'll just go forward and just like drain all their energy in one go, doesn't she? This is her first encounter, so she's going to need to take. Well, she's been asleep for a bit, so she's going to drain him completely. And
in the book, it's Carlson who's being drained. It's not no, it's not actually. So Carlson comes back, and again, sort of playing with sexuality and I guess a very straight male. I mean, it's incredibly straight as well, and I think that made it instantly dated in its viewpoint, because I think, as you said with the Quatermass thing, it feels like, because Quatermass is a very there's no character development in it whatsoever. The people come and they turn up, and no, that's not true. That's not fair. But it's very sort of.
But the one I watched, and I presume the 1955
Quatermass
film.
Experiment.
Experiment. It's very of its time of the 50s, where it's just like deliver their lines. There's no pause for thought. Everyone's just like It's just like far it out, and so we don't really. There's no time for that sort of slowness and development. It's very much like, this has happened. Let's deal with it. That's kind of what happens in the movie. It's good. It's very good, though. I mean, there's no question.
But it's quite restrained and conservative. Although it has, I mean, that's kind of an interesting film, because the whole thing with that is you have is it the police chief or the inspector is talking about how he's a Christian man, and then at the end of the film you get this guy being electrocuted by these people in a cathedral. So there's an irony there. But it's largely kind of quite. It's a conservative tone, and this feels like it's being made in the style of the 1950s. It's got things, even though it's colour film, and it's shot like a Mario Bava movie. I mean, it looks like Blood and Black Lace. It really does. The lighting.
It's Alan Hume, isn't it?
Alan Hume shot, yeah. But I imagine, especially at the end when they get into all those pink colours and things, I think, I mean, that's just giallo Italian horror thriller stuff, and I think that I imagine he probably sat down and shown all these films, but I think there is a kind of, it's very reserved. It feels of another time, and I remember reading a review from the 80s where it said this feels like it's from the 1950s. it feels kind of out of step. There's because it's a very 60s. As I say, very not thinking out of the box. I mean, you think today you could do so much with this concept. I mean, the idea that they have in this film really is almost kind of like this, what it really gets to with the stuff with Patrick Stewart later on, is this kind of pansexual, almost kind of like idea of like, when she's her life force, her as an entity, she travels into different bodies, and that's interesting, but it's sort of played for laughs here, which feels sort of kind of dated.
Isn't her form though the form of what he saw? That forms like the perfect woman in his eyes. That's what he sees.
Yeah, and okay, but if you're going to do that in the book, as I say, he's got a wife. He's Norwegian, by the way. He's not American either in the book, but he's got a wife. And we know what he, the type of woman that he likes. And later on, he's with someone as well. And he's kind of always aware. So it sort of makes sense when things happen. Whereas this guy, we don't know anything about him. We know his name's Tom Carlson, and that's it.
Yeah.
Literally know nothing about him. So how can you explore his desire? Why do you care? Yeah. But this stuff here is stunning. The music is.
Oh yeah, the
amazing.
music really sort of sells these visuals, and it seems like obviously the very English guys going, grab her, she isn't what she's supposed to be, blah, blah, blah. Suddenly it's like this really operatic kind of score kicks in when she attacks them.
Yeah. And we talked a bit through the transformation sequence. The makeup guy for this film, the supervisor, was Nick Maley, who'd done Krull before this and had worked with Stuart Freeborn many times before as well on films like Superman and Star Wars. And that transformation sequence is incredible. It's shot with 4 cameras, and I believe they used 3 computers on it as well too, so they could kind of. I think the idea is they could kind of repeat performances. Although they did it in one take, it was all kind of done, but it's spectacular. This stuff just looks amazing, doesn't it?
It's fantastic.
And the strobe
music
lights
here.
Yeah,
it's really good. Really sells. I love the shot in the moment where she approaches the windows, and you've got that great long shot. As you can see, it's kind of very sort of. It's like split down the middle where you've got all the darkness in the trees and you've got all the glass, and it goes and explodes. It's really well done.
It's really well shot. This all looks like Blood and Black Lace here with the backlighting.
Yeah, definitely.
It's really beautiful. That shot, yeah.
That shot there, this kind of works,
In the book, they don't really do a lot of the kind of lightning type stuff with the streaks and things until right at the end. That's saved right at the end, but that is there. It is there in the book.
I mean, Matilda. I mean, she doesn't really. She gets a few lines to say things and sort of persuade Carlson to follow her. Yeah. But she does a lot with her, mostly with her eyes, and she does a great job with that. Where they just get really like intense, and as she begins to sort of either going to kill you or, well, she's going to kill you either way, absorb your energy, or strike you with a big blue beam or something.
And the ballet-like movement that she has, that's in the book.
Oh right.
Yeah,
okay.
There's loads of good ideas in the book, but it's very hard to kind of summarize it because there are just so many ideas, and it's kind of
structurally a bit wonky.
It's like giving you a plate of spaghetti and trying to make sense of it. Lots of interesting ideas. It's because it's set in the future as well. There's lots of scenes where they're in these things called grasshoppers, which are like these kind of flying cars, but they can fly over the ocean and stuff. I think.
Right, okay.
If I remember that correctly. This all feels very Doctor Who to me.
Oh yeah.
There's lots of beautiful, beautiful camera movement in this film too, as well. Lots of developing shots. You hear about Spielberg and Robert Zemeckis and Scorsese being able to do something all in one take and being able to block and have actors move. This is a masterclass of that. There's so much.
Oh yeah, it shows that Tobe Hooper knows what he's doing, and there's always going to be that debate of how who shot what on Poltergeist. But when you look at LifeForce and then you look at Poltergeist, there's a lot of similar sort of camera work in there. Yeah. So it's showing he's not he's not incompetent.
Sorry, I mentioned before about like this being the perspective being kind of out of touch as well. Like okay, so here's the other thing, right? In this film, they're vampire bats, which sort of makes sense because it alludes to vampires and that kind of thing. Whereas they are how do I say this? They're like space octopus in octopi.
Yeah, I found that was really bizarre because but weirdly, the Quatermass experiment at the end, it is a bit like an octopus. And I thought, wait a minute.
I think, yeah. Well, I've heard people comparing it to Lovecraft and that kind of stuff, tentacles.
Yeah, Lovecraftian stuff. Yeah.
This kind of thing. But I don't know. Yeah, and I think some of the names I saw on Wikipedia the names were the same or something similar to that. But it's but the point is they're genderless from what I remember.
Right.
So the idea of like the relationship between man and a woman, it's not really about that. It's more about the attraction. It actually in the book it feels almost more about consent, like how far can you go to someone, and that when you're getting close to them, and then how it becomes almost. I guess. So
is Carlson promised like longer life, or it ends up being like a ruse where he doesn't?
So this is really complicated. Okay, so they go to. I'm not making this up. They go to Sweden. He meets this count, and while he's there, there's these girls, and those girls are with the count because they make him last longer or something.
Yeah, you mentioned that earlier.
Yeah. And then there's a softcore sequence where you end up with Carlson going with one of these girls into her bedroom, and he pulls out from his bags a picture of his wife and kids and put it on the mantelpiece. But then also is seduced by this woman, or has this kind of, this energy connection thing. And then they say, "Oh yeah, no, we all knew that you were a vampire," kind of thing. So he's like, "Huh?" And then later on, if I've got it correct, they end up going to see the Prime Minister. They don't have the big ending. The ending on this is basically Quatermass in the pit. It's London getting blown up. Again, but they end up going to have this kind of, because there's a lot of this kind of telepathic communication stuff going on in this,
which is a bit in LifeForce where she's communicating with Carlson while he's in hospital.
Yeah, that's where it comes from the book. But but somebody communicates and they say something like, "We've been here for 200 years. We're waiting for those people who are coming the vampire people." Who used to be octopus, and they could be octopi if they want to come back.
That is bonkers,
or something like that. But they've become like energy, I don't know what you call it, energy things. And anyway, so I can't remember if Carlson has that person inside of him. But then at the end, there's also a report written from. When Carlson's 80 or something, right. An extra part of the book that's written as a report by a different character, where he says that Carlson now lives in Sweden. He's onto his third wife, and he seems to be living a very long time. In a tomb, and his wife doesn't say anything about it. She hears a report asking about it, and he's like, no. So it's really, I mean, if you are still listening to this, I applaud you, because it's a big mess. This is great. Look at this stuff; it's so good. A lot of these lenses, by the way, are wide angle, really super wide angle, anamorphic lenses. And Alan Hume had shot films like Supergirl before this, and Return of the Jedi, where they were using multiple cameras, and they're all kind of on longer lenses. And here you've got the opposite, where when you're shooting multiple cameras and stuff, you can't really move the camera too much. Whereas here it's just fluid and different, and it's beautiful. It's a completely different style. But the editing and the direction by Tobe Hooper just makes it so great. Great jump scare there as well that we just saw too, and there another great one too. And the two. Okay, so when in the book, when the girl is brought to London and she's blonde, she's brought with two other women as well. Whereas in here it's two guys, and again it's why they have these two guys, and they talk about the rules of the vampires and people seeing their perfect person in this film. Their ideal partner or whatever, their dream, the ideal woman. But they've got two guys and they do nothing with them.
No, they're kind of like because they're all connected, aren't they? So if one dies, he's going to lose some energy and power. So it's like they're just there to sort of help the transition, isn't it, or taking over? But they don't have much to do at all, other than the fact that they then just disappear and appear at the end to sort of stop him getting into church.
And they talk this exposition. They don't show us a lot of it, and it's twisting and turning. But if somebody's just telling you this stuff, you want to see it. You want to see things happening.
Yeah.
I think Fran Finlay is really good in this film.
Okay. As I was mentioning earlier about the sort of unoriginal, kind of bland office-like areas they have, but you're watching these scenes with amazing British actors who are just really sort of treating it very seriously and just delivering it with such like class. And yeah, Finlay, I mean, he's amazing in this, and he's got the great lines like "Here I go," and his face becomes all puffy. It's good. It's really good, and it's they're very ambitious. Trying to have just this kind of zombie kind of come back to life, corpse as it were, and it's all you look at it now. It's very rudimentary and very kind of stiff and It's not Jim Henson quality, but it's it still kind of sells it at the time. I think it's just interesting, and the stuff works later on where he charges at them and then he explodes. It's a great edit, and he hits the fence, the barrier or the fence, whatever, and the door, and just goes into dust.
But this is a great. I mean, you don't think it's Henson worthy?
No, not quite. But it also shows you that it's not just like anyone can be pulled in to with their life force. It doesn't matter. It's not like I don't explain it applies. It's like a sexual attraction. It's just like you just. It's manipulation. It's kind of you're under a spell.
Yeah, whereas the whole point in the book is that it's this, it's like when two people meet and they have this chemistry, I guess. It's that kind of, that's what more it's about, whereas this is just like a trance, which is more, and I think, I was saying before about the chemistry thing, that's what is in like Dracula and all those, in vampire legend and mythology. Sorry, this was the transformation that is shot on 4 cameras and uses three computers. And that's directed by Nick Maley as well, this section, apparently. It's, I think they used what was called a Waldo rig, I think, for this, which is like a contraption where a performer, I might have this wrong, where a performer it's almost like a motion capture thing, but old analog style. And the movements that the performer makes are mirrored by the puppet. I might have that wrong, actually.
It's interesting that they created the puppet where they could have just put someone in makeup, prosthetics.
Oh, you couldn't get them that thin, though, could you?
Yeah, true. I mean, you could just get a very thin person and just, put the hair on and, I don't know, as a sort of alternative.
It's a very beautifully suspenseful scene, really well done. This stuff here, look, you got all these reflections. This would be a nightmare to shoot, all this. In a 3-shot as well, with all the people behind the glass. There's going to be a sequence coming up in Hyde Park, and Hyde Park appears quite a lot in the book. Also, whiskey appears a lot in the book. They drink a lot of whiskey. They're drinking whiskey on the spaceship. They drink it, I think, at the end. They mention whiskey. I think Colin Wilson, who wrote the book, must have really liked whiskey. I don't know why, but yeah.
If it was me, it'd be a lot of White Russians on a spaceship with White Russians,
I doubt this is the actual Hyde Park. I think it's probably a field near Elstree.
No, I was always going to be a field. Me and Tim, me and you probably just walked through it one time trying to find something else.
Falada here looks very Quatermass.
Definitely.
Dr. Quatermass, I think, yeah. I got confused the first time I watched this, thinking that was supposed to be Ellen Donaldson, the nurse from later on, who's lying as a corpse on the floor, because she similarly has wavy red hair. But even their dialogue, the way that they deliver it and everything, it feels very...
The lads, when they sort of went to have a look and see, because they were intrigued, as you would be. But they deliver it in a very natural way. feels like just two kids just being grilled by the police. I'm like,
But the delivery of the actors and everything feels very kind of stilted and kind of, I think intentionally by design, everything's kind of very composed.
Well, again, it's at the moment, especially the discussion between these two. It's Finley and the other gentleman who's very much like Doctor Who. They're delivering dialogue like quick, fast. There's no real pause for thought or just to sort of confer. It's just like, they know what they're talking about. They're very confident in what they're saying.
Nobody takes anyone aside and says something like, "I feel bad," or somebody pulls out a cigarette, or I've got to go see my kids now, or there's nothing, none of that. They're just there, aren't they, to serve this? To completely serve the plot.
Which gives it that sort of 1950s kind of vibe.
Very wooden. Look at this dynamic camera work here, the way it's just flying around, moving. They were shooting a lot as well on this film. We saw in the making of as well.
Went over like big time. It's supposed to be like a month shoot, but it turned to be 3 months or something like that. And then they were editing for like a year on it.
I get the impression that Spielberg, when he would shoot, he'd do it on a normal schedule, but he would still have camera work like this. Whereas I feel maybe with Tobe Hooper, he would need twice as long.
Well, they implied very early on that he was not well. He had been taking quite a lot of drugs. Don't know what sort of drugs, but on set he was just constantly smoking cigars and drinking Dr. Pepper. It must be, and the caffeine in him must be like he's just very juddery, and probably wasn't entirely focused. Hence why they think they've gone over. Had to reshoot like a lot of scenes.
And he'd done a film before this, a couple of years before, where he's the first director on a film called Venom. I don't know if you've seen that one.
No, I've seen Venom. No.
Which is a kind of thriller. It's a kind of, if I remember, a political thriller, but it's got like a snake in it that attacks people, and it's got this incredible cast with people like Klaus Kinski in it, who and it's kind of nuts. But yeah, even he couldn't, I think, stand that. And so he'd been working in England. He'd worked on something previously before. The costume designer on this film, by the way, was Karen Hooper, who I believe was his wife at the time, Tobe Hooper's wife. And I feel the costumes look like an American's idea of what English people would wear in the 1950s. Or maybe even the 60s. Just things like the trench coat that Kane wears later on, and all of the kind of suits as well. Like Florida's suit doesn't look like something an English gentleman would wear, with the pink shirts and stuff. It looks almost like something that somebody wearing a cartoon. I mean, look at this. This is great, isn't it? This is such a great.
It's really good, yeah.
You forget that it's just a puppet.
This looks better than the other puppet. I think just down to I don't know, it's sort of seems to be kind of animated with a bit more gusto,
The way it's shot as well just really, really helps it. I love all the reaction shots of the actors. Just looking terrified and queasy.
And it's great, the whole thing just goes boom and explodes, doesn't it? It's really clever.
I remember Harry Mancini saying that when he did the score, he had separate kind of tracks of things like ambient sounds, just crazy ambient sounds, that they could drop in the edit wherever they wanted to. So you've got bits of the score where you'll just hear like a sound effect going, you hear something creepy, and it sort of becomes sound design. And that's really clever and really adds to it. I mean, it's a beautiful score. It really is. That's great.
Well, I a lot of folks sort of, pointed out that John Ottman was quite inspired by the LifeForce main theme for X-Men.
Really?
Yeah. By the end, like the final notes of LifeForce are just pretty much X-Men identical. X-Men 2 and the other ones he did.
I've heard some people. I've read some things too saying this is a possible AIDS allegory and things like that. But again, if you look at Quatermass Experiment and the book, all that kind of shriveled people thing, dying people, it's there.
Yeah,
it's there before this was.
Like the guy, who in Quatermass where he's escaped from in the rocket, and then his hands begin to turn into this thing. He looks like the guy who got first taken by Matilda May. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It looks very
exactly.
similar, and he's like, you know,
And you know what? That scene, which is beautiful in Quatermass and the Experiment, where they're looking through glass as well. They're looking through glass, and there's silence. And Tobe Hooper shoots it pretty much exactly the same in LifeForce. He does similar things. And this is supposed to be Texas, but it's probably the park that they just used
yeah.
with some rain and lights flashing around. But again, it looks completely fantastic. This is Barnet House here too. You can see out the window. That's North London, behind Bukowski. I mean, look at that. That's so 80s, isn't it?
Oh
The
god,
decor.
a bloody green carpet.
When you went to the
Ugh.
doctors in the 80s, that's what it looked like. You know, there's that new Ben Affleck film called Air that came out, and they do a really good job of recreating exactly how it felt to someone who was our age in the 80s. Everything looked brown.
Yeah.
It really, really... And Tetris, I think, as well, that film too.
Tetris did a very good job.
Maybe they just watched LifeForce. They were like, we want that. I mean, look at the pattern across the top of the ceiling.
It's bonkers, isn't it?
It's crazy.
Who puts chairs behind a TV? I mean, that's just silly.
I think this is I think Barnet House as well, too. There's a lovely bit of camera work coming up here where they go here, move across the back of Coulson to try and get inside of him. I mean, he's very intense, isn't he, Steve Railback, in this? He's just shouting, and I think it would have helped massively if he had a wife and two children too, and especially if you're going to go down that route of.
Especially because he's obsessed with her now.
Yeah.
You know, the head vampire. And he's got to make a choice. And he just, he makes a choice to save the day and obviously sacrifice himself. But yeah, I think there could be more conflict within him instead of him just I loved her and I turned against everyone else because I already she had to be mine.
In the book as well, they don't. They can possess people, but it's different. They're not. You know, in this, they're kind of moving from one to one, and then they leave them as dust. The leaving that people as dust element isn't in the book. It's kind of different in that respect. I'd read somewhere, I think it was on some Goofs thing or whatever, that that Coulson's uniform that he's wearing. That he's got the way he's decorated is wrong. Apparently, he's actually wearing a Southern Korean army thing. But I don't know. They do a really good job here of hiding the wires. You can't see the.
You can't. No, you can't.
Looks fantastic.
Very good. There's a funny thing. If you go on IMDb trivia for LifeForce, under trivia it says this is Oliver Harper's favourite canon films movie. Yeah, so it's not really important trivia, people. So whoever put that in, thank you, but it's very odd
to know that somewhere out there, Tobe Hooper's LifeForce may find out that this was he created Oliver Harper's favourite canon movie.
It's so bizarre.
Well, there's the internet for you. These flashbacks are really fun. I can try and remember if they have any flashbacks like this in the book. To be honest, I really can't remember.
I think most folk tend not to watch the US cut, do they? I mean, everyone who talks about this movie, it's just like it's got to be the international cut. You know, it's I think they've just recently I think re-released Michael Kamen's score, or maybe for the first time his complete score to LifeForce, and I don't mind the music, but it is very much a rush job to sort of cover up these the shorter cuts and the quick cuts that they've made. And Henry Mancini's score was just it's a different league of its own.
Yeah.
Despite Kamen also putting out some incredible scores, it just felt like got to get this done quick.
Well, I think he was given a directive as well, where it's like, we want horror music, and there's some piano bits of it that almost sound like the Halloween theme in places. John Carpenter. It's got a completely different vibe, and as you said, he was doing it very quickly. I think a sort of situation with Legend with Goldsmith and Tangerine Dream. Sort of we want a different vibe to it. Yeah, we want this, and it's got to be done by X. And on top of that, he's scoring a film that doesn't work as well, Kamen.
Yeah,
because it's all been re-edited to not really make sense. I made some notes just about the book that I'm just kind of looking at here, of things that okay, so another thing that happened in the book that doesn't happen in the film but unusually is like Quatermass. You remember in Quatermass there's that bit where they watch the film footage of what happened on the spaceship. You remember that bit? So they have a sequence. Well, they film everything. Everything that's going on in LifeForce in the book, but yeah, they didn't, for whatever reason they chose not to use that in the film.
There's a lot of like they for some of the like generic locations, from earlier, Alan Hume and Tobe Hooper really got creating a lot of camera movements within these scenes.
Yeah.
And even as then, you've got this sort of Dutch angle. The camera keeps going, kind of seesawing from left to right a little bit. So maybe to sort of simulate the effect of the spaceship. But
yeah, if you notice, just above Steve Earle's back there's a skylight in here. There's a skylight in Falada's office. Obviously, there's a skylight obviously at the end when they're in the cathedral too. So that's a nice unified piece of production design. And obviously has religious connotations with it, which is really clever. Yeah, it's really cleverly done.
it's kind of like the Nostromo done on a cheap or something.
Well, it's different, isn't it?
Yeah, it's more. It's obviously it's a different time period, but it's but it's a little bit more it reminds me a little bit of Outland with Sean Connery.
Oh yeah.
And these sort of tight corridors.
Yeah. I think they do a really good job of zero G as well. You get a feeling, even though he's running along and there's no gravity. I think they say at the beginning that they're turning the gravity off.
Yeah.
This gun thing, there's an element of this when they're finding the space vampires at the beginning of the book. This is kind of from that. So this is another element that's been used kind of later on as well. Aubrey Morris's character of Percy Heseltine as well. I believe he's like a commissioner at Scotland Yard in the book, whereas here he's the Home Secretary too. So they've changed him. Falada follows Kane around pretty much Carlson. Kane's, as I said, I can't remember much about Kane in the book, but it's Falada going around. Like they go to Sweden together, I mean, it's very like, very much from a 70s male point of view, very male gazy. The book, very very much so, and it just seems kind of closed in that way. And as I say, once you then adapt that and give it this kind of 50s sensibility, it becomes I mean, I would do, if I was doing this, I'd do something. I'd make Kane, the character of Kane in the film, cast Helen Mirren at this time as well. You've got a room full of these kind of English old bureaucrats who are all over like the age of 50, and then you mess it up, and then have a scene with her, go head to head. Just interesting things that you could do. It feels very out of step, with the times.
I suppose there's a slight carryover from the 70s where you had a lot of the leads being kind of middle-aged men, even older. And they were all sort of lusting over in some way over Matilda May, who's like 18.
It's like a bit schoolboy sex humour kind of
thing. Yeah.
It could almost be Confessions of a Astronaut or something, I mean, no, it's different because obviously she's she's playing a vampire character, but it's just like the perspective of it. It's all very sort of tame, but in its sexuality massively. This is a very Bava looking sequence. I'd almost say it's a bit kind of Dario Argento looking.
Oh, for sure. Well, when she appears, the use of lighting. Yeah.
And for all the talk of her being just naked for a lot of the film, she's not in that much of the film.
No, she's not. No, and it's only like maybe it's the opening sequence with her, and this sequence here, and then the end piece. You get to see her really, but everything else is kind of because she possesses someone else, doesn't she? Like Patrick Stewart, and then you see her kind of just form in like blood, don't you?
Yeah. The music here is really well done. It sounds really gothic.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, sort of psychedelic, sort of 70s kind of European horror.
It's interesting how we associate those kind of like pink lighting and stuff like that, with the 80s, and they were taking it from people like Mario Bava and Argento. The sound design is great here too, all the wailing and screaming.
It's a big old snog fest. If you love snogging, the film for you.
I mean, they sort of another thing they do in the book is they compare humans. I think the justification is for the aliens who are criticizing the humans. When the humans criticize them for doing vampirism, they're saying things like, "Well, was it you're eating cows or something like that? They who eat grass, which is living, and that's a version of vampirism, and it's nuts."
Have you ever had a dream where you wake up screaming?
Well, and I managed to sit right in focus of a camera that's that's right in front of me.
I don't think I've ever had a night terror like that before. One of my friends had a couple of times, and he's done it where he was in like an office with his work colleagues and scared the shit out of them.
Right. The hypnosis that's about to happen here. They do that in the book in Sweden, from what I remember, with Carlson, and I think it's pretty much the same at that point, or relatively. Nothing's kind of exact. Lots of nice use of dissolves in this as well. What do you think of the editing in this?
I think it's pretty slick. I mean, it's because you're not really dealing with much action at the moment. To keep the pace going, they managed to really pull it off. So John Grover, he did this. He's also dealing with a lot of the Bond films, which have a lot more going on. Where this is kind of very much like it's little pieces of action. Where at the end it goes kind of full whack. But the use of dissolves and to keep the pace moving without kind of losing anything. It's done a very good job. But then, as I mentioned at the beginning, you do have this kind of middle act kind of lull because you're not really having anything really kind of big and exciting happening. It's just kind of we've got basically to try and find out where she's going in this new body.
There's no big special effects set piece.
No, and that's where you think where all the money, they said a lot of money went on the actors, but I mean, a lot of the actors are kind of small B players, like UK actors.
I think the money went on the sets.
And like obviously
special effects.
Apogee, where it's very much the beginning of the movie, the section. You've got the puppets and stuff, and the final part with a lot of the opticals. That's where the money really went. And this was the first of Cannon's big blockbusters, or intended big blockbusters, where they were trying to compete with Warner Brothers, Fox, and Paramount, because all they'd been doing was putting out films that cost $1 million, $2 million, and waiting for one of those movies to hit it big, and they get like $30 million back, especially like with Break-In and Missing in Action and Delta Force. No, not really Delta Force, but before that, they like Enter the Ninja. Those sort of pictures where they didn't cost much. Now they're putting 20 million in and just not holding back, not cutting back, and just pumping everything into this kind of bonkers movie that doesn't really inherently work, but it's got a lot of elements to it that are really interesting, and that really appeals to the genre fans of horror and science fiction. And they didn't really learn their lesson on this, because they then thought, well, we'll just continue and try to get Stallone involved with Over the Top, and then that didn't work out. At the same time, they'd got the rights from the Soul Kinds to make Superman, and then they got Mattel to make rights of Mattel to make He-Man. They couldn't afford to finish He-Man, and sort of got Mattel to pay for the rest of it. People always keep saying to me, it's like, oh, like half Superman 4's budget went to He-Man. It's like, no, it never did. It was like Canon had 30 to 40 movies out in 1986 in production. Mm-hmm. They spread themselves so thin, and Mattel had to pay for most of He-Man because Canon couldn't afford to pay the rest of it. But this all kind of stemmed from their kind of too early on trying to change their business practice of, make smaller movies, hope for a big return. They went for a big investment and ended up getting little in return.
Yeah. It's just bizarre, isn't it?
But I just love their gambles, though, and I love their daringness to do this sort of stuff. And everyone always had a bit of a bad word to say about Golden Globus, and they'll be not getting paid properly, or just these kind of mad decisions they make. But I just love their sort of showmanship and that old studio moguls kind of attitude, and just taking a risk on everything, which you can't fault them for,
And Runaway Train was a great film.
I like Runaway Train, but I went into that being told it was like a masterpiece, and I watched it and went, it's good, but it's not great.
Mm-hmm.
And now it could have won Oscars if it was under Orion Pictures, and
2 Oscar nominations. Yeah,
it did. Yeah. I mean, I think they said if it was made by another studio, it could have had more lasting legs, right? But Runaway Train, yeah. I mean, also you got what was the one about the bar with Barfly, yeah. I mean, that's not a movie that people kind of highly praise, and Street Smart got a lot of praise, but it was just kind of Canon. They put these movies out and didn't put any money behind them to market the bloody thing,
So this if you look in the window,
another photo, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a blow up. So yeah, in that NASA window there, if you go back and pause and look at it and go frame by frame, you'll
Tim would do,
like I would do, you can see that it's just basically a gigantic photographic still that they've blown up.
I've never been too impressed with when you see like the stuff in space. When you see Earth, it just looks unfinished. Like the paint. Look at that.
Right.
That looks awful.
So they had.
Didn't they say? I think they had mentioned that some things were unfinished or didn't have enough time left to finish off some shots. But
yeah, it's weird because the Apogee, from what I understand, they come on a bit later on the film. I think John Graysmark had basically hired an artist called Tony Adams, he's kind of like a novelist illustrator, but he had been, I think, responsible for a lot of the things in Flash Gordon, the skies that you saw in the 1980 Flash Gordon.
He did the big ship in this, didn't he? The big spaceship.
Yeah. So I think on Flash Gordon he was responsible for all the stuff with the swirly ink skies that you saw. Well, he's credited as artist on that, and so he was on this, as you say, doing the ships at the beginning. But I think it was concept art. But he also had done some glass matte stuff. But that stuff had been done, and then Apogee. It's weird because Apogee came over to the UK. They filmed in the UK.
They even brought their massive optical printer
and the motion control stuff. And
Crikey.
they actually sat, from what I can gather, they were across the road from Elstree Studios at BBC Elstree, which at that time had just been sold by Lou Grade. I think before they did Aviva St. Pet.
Was that when I started doing EastEnders? Didn't they?
Just before that, yeah.
Oh, right.
So there was nobody in that building except the LifeForce miniature effects crew doing motion control shots.
Wow.
And then John Dykstra and Doug Smith, who went on to win an Oscar for Independence Day, they then travelled an hour to Christchurch and went to the Tuctonia Model Village and filmed the models there. But all of the stuff with the energy particle stuff, which basically is big drums with mylar crumple inside of them, being spun around with lasers being shot into them. That stuff was all done in LA at Apogee, at the facility located where they did the original Star Wars.
Man.
So this stuff here at Thurleston, I think the name Thurleston, the location, pretty much everything is very, very similar, like down to the dialogue massively. I mean, I was talking before about the very 1970s viewpoint of the book, and there was one. There was one quote. I can't find it where it is, but it was something like, once Carlson has slept with the young woman in Sweden, and he says something like, Flada says, "Oh, don't feel bad about it because she seduced you or whatever." But then he says something like, "Oh, I didn't even. You know what? I've been with my wife for 10 years. I've not even kissed another woman." Just says it like that. Really? Wow. That's unusually monogamous of you. Anyway, that's the kind of viewpoint of it. But also the language that it uses to describe Dr. Armstrong, who here is played by the brilliant Patrick Stewart. They say he's something like, they say he talks like an actor. Here, where is it? Dr. Armstrong, fruity and cultured with an actor's voice. Fruity and cultured. And they use all of the, they're trying to point out that and trying to foreshadow what's going to happen next by having him touch Carlson on the shoulders and stuff. And here, actually, this is like, okay, this scene is where I think the film should be. And if you were to do a remake of it now, I think, or even in the 80s, actually, if you notice on the wall, you can see there are androgynous imagery. You've got things like David Bowie and Harlequin, these androgynous kind of icons, and then you've got a butterfly, so there's transformation or something, and it's basically it's foreshadowing. They're using mise en scène to tell you what's happening, in the scene, but it is very, as I say, it's a very straight man's 1970s viewpoint, but put through a 1950s kind of style. Whereas I think you could do so much more. And I think it would have been more interesting, especially now, the idea of it. And with the creatures in the book being genderless, of having people travelling to bodies of different genders, but the soul being the same.
Would you, though, in the case of, if they remade this, would you want it to follow this kind of storyline and improve upon it, or follow the book?
I think you'd have to go back to the book.
You'd have to go back to the
book and just do a complete. But I wouldn't do it, to be honest. I'd just leave
it
alone.
I'd definitely leave it alone. Well, it is. It's a great movie because it's a cult classic and it's somewhat of a guilty pleasure in places, and I there's got a lot of cool stuff to it, but it's not a perfect movie. And I think there's some. That you could take those elements, really cool elements in it, and then give it a new twist, But I wouldn't want to change the location. It would have to be London, And I want to see London blow up again.
I think, I think setting it in the present, even though they couldn't really do a futuristic England at that time, I think it benefited
I don't think
massively.
having it set in the future makes it interesting.
No, I think they solely did that, so it solved the idea of space. People think space
and future.
Space, yeah, exactly, that kind of thing. Oh, by the way, the actor who plays Ellen Donaldson, the nurse, is Nancy Paul, and she was in Jerry Anderson's Space Precinct as Lieutenant Brogan's wife.
God, Space Precinct. Good theme tune that had.
But here she is doing an English accent.
Oh.
There's some really nice camera direction here with staging of 4 people. If you look at it, it's an absolute masterclass of how you do it. I think in the next moment they walk into the office of Dr. Armstrong, and we'll see it when it happens. But it's a brilliant use of the foreground and the background, all kind of in one shot. It's all in camera editing. It's really quite special.
This is what I know. Patrick Stewart also appeared in Excalibur and Dune. I don't know, has he done before those two?
I think he's done a lot of theatre.
Yeah,
I think those were his kind of entryways. Into movies.
There's always a trivia about this. This was Patrick Stewart's first on-screen kiss, and it was with Franz Pack.
Right. Yeah, here this is great. Just the use of
Wales back,
foreground.
isn't it?
And
Natural security. Ooh.
I love stuff like this. I love the way it's played all just in one shot.
Well, that's what how they're standing as well. It's just you know,
Get them to
it makes great use of the framing. You know, nothing's wasted. You're not seeing. You know, it makes perfect use of the 2:3:5 aspect ratio. I see so many filmmakers nowadays who just shoot in scope because they can. Look at the options there. Well, that make good use of it.
We're shooting close-ups.
Bloody hell, yeah. Zack Snyder. Fucking hell.
Or in shallow focus, so you get no... And you can use shallow focus, but, you know...
It's just a waste of the format, you know.
I think using all the planes is very important in an image. Always. I didn't realise until I listened to one of the commentaries, but in this sequence where they go inside of this room, when all the chaos starts happening, they basically had built the set. Oh no, it's not here. It's later on. I keep forgetting some of this.
Yeah, because I thought they're going to go there now, but it's actually going to see another patient. You know,
Yeah.
He's got a massive. What's that? A big mole on his face.
Yeah. I mean, this looks like something out of fantasy, doesn't it? It really does. This looks completely not the 1980s and not a.
Well, it's like something in
it's Victorian.
Yeah, right. Coppola's Dracula. You know, where you got Renfield. You know, trapped in that room.
Yeah, it looks completely.
Master, and he gives him the stuff like the thank you.
But even that kind of doctor's outfit that the actor John Hallam is wearing, it looks very kind of American. It looks very, very much a kind of what you would see in a period film, like you say, in Bram Stoker's Dracula. If they had a doctor character in a cell, they would look in an asylum. They would look like that.
Oh yeah.
And even the floor, everything about it's so overdone. It's such an American, cartoony view of England from many years ago. It doesn't look like an NHS facility from 1984.
No.
And, you know, that's great.
But then if you look at like In the Mouth of Madness, you know, you've got the corridors all seem kind of modern, but once they go into the prison, like the padded cells, it feels very much something of the past.
Yeah.
You know, in this room here, for example, I mean...
It looks like Return to Oz, doesn't it?
Yes! Fucking hell. Yeah, good comparison. That kept popping into my head.
Which was shooting at Elstree at the same time.
Man, yeah.
But yeah, this whole set is built on like a drum. And it spins round when all that chaos happens.
Wow. Very cool. Very cool.
I mean, that's so cool, isn't it?
Yeah. I just love I love the optical work in this movie. It's sort of the beams of light and stuff. It's always cool to see.
Yeah. As I said before, that's all done with
Mylar, isn't it?
Yeah, it's Mylar. The drum spinning around with Mylar in it, and a laser being fired into it.
I always love Richard Edlund's kind of optical beams of lightning and blasts in He-Man the movie. 65mm stuff. Just like you can't beat that stuff. I love it. That's kind of the joys of the analog world.
The other thing that looks really cool, and it's Alan Hume and working with John Dykstra, but the flashes of lightning reacting as things are happening.
Yeah, the timing's good.
But they really sell it massively.
Yeah, because it makes it seem real. Because often the case is they don't. Some films they've forgotten to add on-set lighting, and they've had to sort of artificially do stuff, and it doesn't work.
Doesn't look great.
Just the clever stuff Alan Hume did in Supergirl, where he's got the two bits of cardboard in front of the camera lens or the lighting to give the omegahedron that sort of glow. Yeah,
you're absolutely right.
Very clever. I feel sorry for the Home Secretary who gets his neck broken. You know, it's unfortunate because he's such a good actor and performance and likable character they've created, and he just gets taken out, just kind of off camera, doesn't he? He's broken his neck. It's like, oh, he's dead.
No, this is all. So what we've seen, all this stuff and all the stuff with the nurse, that's all completely in the book. In fact, there's an awful line. And it's very sexist, and just really yucky. Where Coulson says, "If you don't want to be here, go outside." And Kane says, "No, I'm a natural voyeur," or something like that. He says,
right.
and that's line for line, exactly as it was in the book.
Interesting.
And what's his face? Peter Firth doesn't look very comfortable saying it either. I don't really buy it. But again, I think, as I said, it's very. It's a very kind of heterosexual viewpoint of the relationship between men and women. I think in Tobe Hooper's brief and his mind of what he wanted to do, and I think
if they changed it now, if they remade it, they'd probably incorporate it to be like
more inclusive.
More inclusive, yeah. It's in 1984 they're making this, so what do you expect?
Well, no, but you say that, but then you'd had Dog Day Afternoon, which was 10 years before this, which was one of the big Oscar films, directed by Sidney Lumet. And you have a trans character in that. You have a sexually androgynous character. Well, you have a gender identity issues in Down Out in Beverly Hills, which came out the year after this as well.
But were they smaller budget films though?
But they were major studio films. They weren't Canon movies. This is Canon trying to be at market, and it's so kind of out of time. My point is, it's not just about that. It's more just the fact that, like, whenever I see people watch this, they just look at these scenes and they go, "Ooh, it's Patrick Stewart nearly kissed that guy," and they don't look at what it actually is and what the concept is, and the whole idea of the seduction and in vampirism, and what the book was really going for in terms of like this idea of consent between two people and the energies and the kind of ballet of energies in it sharing each other, and if you had like a vampire, I mean, it all goes back to vampires, but it sort of makes a kind of joke, or it comes across as laughable when it's a really kind of interesting idea, and as I said, there's so many nods to kind of human, even though they're very male gaze. In the book, they're very they're human elements of kind of male horniness, I guess, that just make sense for when you see it. Whereas here, there's just it's complete lack of humanity sort of cancels out the whole point of it,
But I think that also maybe a result of, as you said earlier, with Carlson, he doesn't have a backstory.
Yeah.
So it's difficult to sort of invest in his plight to a certain degree.
Yeah.
But the actor Railsback, he's really going for it. He's not holding back. He's like, he's not stilted, at all in terms of his performance. He's really getting into it.
Yeah.
Let me go.
It's great sound design. I love the lampshade at the top.
Yeah, that's good.
With the music, the synergy. There's a synergy of like music, sound, and image in this, which is stunning. And this is one sequence where you're just like, it's really impressively done.
Oh, I love this bit. Look at that.
Yeah.
Gets thrown.
Look how violent it is.
So you think he would have got his neck broken?
Yeah.
But he's fine. But it's just the Home Secretary. You don't even see get thrown. Maybe because of his age, I didn't want to sort of have him get thrown somewhere. I don't know. It's a bit poltergeist, this bit, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, we haven't even spoken about that, have we?
I mentioned earlier, but that's about it.
Well, I mean, in depth, like to the point where, like,
we have a perfect scene to show that he's done poltergeist. This is like classic, like paranormal activity.
Yeah, I mean, this does, as you say, when you hear about the whole thing of the poltergeist thing, did Spielberg direct it? Did Hooper direct it? Which you'd spoken about before. It's like you can see, maybe, who knows, but you can see something was definitely learned from this.
Yes, for sure.
It's already spreading. How? You didn't stop it. It's too late. That's impossible. We've been only half a step behind her all the way. Sir, this gentleman stopped breathing. There's no pulse.
It's spread all over Pontins. Oh my God, what are we going to do?
Sir, I think his neck is broken.
Another crazy thing from the book is that I believe the octopus people from the water-based planet believe that they don't fall in love, like when they sexually climax, they, on my notes, I'm just reading it here. It's like the idea that they don't fall in love with sex or things, or they fall in love with the universe. I can't even read my own. I think by this point I was just scratching my head at the book.
I think now we've got to sort of fall into the third act now, where things are going to kick off with some good action and some zombies.
That's Bushy and Rickmansworth as well. This area, I forget if it might be one of the Masonic schools or something like that, but that's where they filmed it. John Dykstra directed the little. No, he didn't direct that. No, I think Nick Maley directed the makeup stuff that's coming up. But there's a gag later on. We'll get to it anyway. I'll point that. John Dykstra did. I love the use of shadow here. I think this is really well done. So all the thing with the shaft of lead going under the heart, I mean, that's very vampire-y, that's very vampire-y, and that's something that isn't in the book. That's made.
Look out the window. There's already sort of chaos has already started.
Yeah.
And it doesn't look like how they've designed the painting at the back. It looks very like Victorian. It looks like
Almost.
It's way in the past. Look at that, in the background. It's just like these big factories, it looks like,
Well, it looks very romanticized, doesn't it? Very, very much an American viewpoint of England of the past.
It's also like when you watch like Hook, that has a very romantic look of London. It's the Hallmark card design of London.
And it's not even filmed there.
No, and it's filming on Christmas Day, which is rubbish. It never
With
does.
snow.
Yeah.
But this is particularly well done. I mean, Tobe Hooper is an expert at suspense filming. It's really, really good. In the American cut, while they're away, while they've gone to Yorkshire or wherever, to the Thilson place, there's a random cutaway for absolutely no reason of one of the later shots of a zombie walking down a street, crawling between some bins. So not an establishing shot of London. It's just like this creepy new Michael Kamen music playing that sounds like Halloween theme, and you've got this person, in a shell suit, I think, tracksuit, crawling across next to some bins, and so they put that in the middle for no reason, to kind of, I think, to set up what's happening in London. Whereas here it's just oh wow,
this is really clever. Like this bit when it's the blood.
Yeah.
It's spinning as it kind of forms into Matilda May. It's so inventive.
You can see the Patrick Stewart dummy, his eyes move as well.
Yeah, it's pretty gross.
I mean, this is about as violent as the film gets, I think, isn't it? In terms of blood.
This is how Carnage should look in a because that Venom sequel they made had Carnage in it,
right?
And he's supposed to be made of blood and stuff, and it sort of should look like that in a certain degree.
We lost her. She's gone. Where? Her body's in London. Where in London?
Ooh. Trocadero, yes.
It's well done though, in that you don't see the helicopter much from outside. You don't see what they're coming to. It's just a total surprise.
You got a wide shot when it comes into London and you see the flames going.
Yeah, I mean, just now here, there's no graduation. You don't see anything in that the window. They've. I like that. I much prefer them just finding out quickly that so much bad has happened. Like, oh, by the way, the apocalypse has just happened. Oh, yeah, you got to
it's
face
kind
it.
of spread really quickly, you know.
Rather than building to it. I think that would make it different. This sequence coming up, I remember reading something online about the lenses that were used, because they're all very super. There's these shots where they're kissing, and it's super wide angle. And I believe they're spherical lenses. The film shot anamorphic, but for just those, they used these really super wide angle.
That's what sort of Gilliam, Gilliam uses, you know.
Or Ken Russell or Kubrick, or really super, like major distorted.
Yeah.
And from what I remember, they shot it a bit spherically, and then I think they squashed them, or they distorted them, stretched them. So in the film, it's this stretched spherical stuff, I think, from what I remember. This was years ago, and I couldn't find what I'd read previously. But it gives it such an amazing look. It's really striking and scary.
I think most of the reviews were mixed, weren't they, when this came out, because it's had underperformed.
Yeah.
And it was just, do you think down to the sort of the hastily cuts TriStar had made? Do you think it would have been successful either way? You know, if it was kept in its original form?
I don't know. What do you think?
I think edits still should have been made a little bit. I think it's for 2 hours, and as mentioned, it's a little bit. The middle act has a sort of slower pace. I think they could have either trimmed a bit down, or maybe had another sequence that has some action elements that would have sort of, you know, kept the excitement up a little bit. I think that would have worked, but I think it's a difficult movie to market. I think the posters are great, but you have to sort of, when you see it, it's very much for a specific audience. I think it's not ultimately it's not for everyone.
I don't know about the name, changing the name. I really don't.
Do you think it would have been Space Vampires? It could have been called Energy Things.
I think Space Vampires really sounds like a canon film.
Yeah, and also it sounds like a really cheap B movie, you know. Yeah. Oh, look at that shot. Love it. Yeah.
And if you look at the far right, there's St. Paul's Cathedral. Look at that miniature. The one that they actually used later on is not that miniature. It's this. I don't know what it's supposed to be. Maybe they weren't allowed to. I don't know.
This bit is nuts. What is it? Boom!
It's in the wrong
look
frame
at
rate.
that.
The music
that
here
gave away its scale a little bit there.
The music's fantastic as well.
Oh, I love all this stuff.
Yeah.
Zombie invasion. Oh, this is before 28 Days Later.
And the music here is just absolutely fantastic. As it lands in Whitehall. I remember reading somewhere that this bit was shot at the same place as the place for the criminally insane that they'd been to.
Oh, right.
Which makes sense because
it's clever use, you know.
And this set that they're about to walk into is, I think, quite clearly, very well done, very, very, very well done. But to me, it looks like the inside of the Space Research Centre, but redressed.
Right. Okay.
It's like the same stairway. And look outside the door. So this sequence with the Prime Minister here, you've got the person playing secretary looks kind of Thatcher-esque. Why? I don't get. They ended up using a guy called Peter Porteous, who I believe was the husband of Emma Porteous, who's the costume designer of the 80s Bond films and Supergirl and Judge Dredd. And he comes and he's... I just don't get it. I don't get why they couldn't have just, especially knowing...
just had a female Prime Minister, but they have Thatcher.
Just to match the time. I mean, they're literally making it about Halley's Comet, which is dating it already. And also knowing, knowing Tobe Hooper's own very liberal politics.
Yeah.
Vampires, Thatcher, I don't know. I mean, he literally made a film throwing his politics all around with Texas Chainsaw Massacre too.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It just feels again sort of like we're setting it for no reason in this alternate past of romanticized London, even though we're actually dating it as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean, Tim. Yeah.
And I thought that when I watched it as a teen.
I didn't notice that when I first saw it, but once you sort of point it out, it's kind of really obvious.
Well, it takes out layers from it. I mean, you don't even have to have your politics in it, just to have it reflect the time. There, that's obviously repainted, isn't it?
Yeah.
Set from before. So when they go in the helicopter and they fire the flare gun, the shots of the zombie are directed by John Dykstra.
Okay.
And they show that in the original making of.
It's pretty gross though when they grab on, their skin comes off their hands,
Yeah. This music too, it sounds Henry Mancini at this time, I think, this is my opinion, I think he really wanted to score a Sherlock Holmes film. I really do.
Think so?
Because he did this, which basically is a Sherlock Holmes score. He then did Basil the Great Mouse Detective, which isn't really Sherlock Holmes, but it's close because it's got a cartoon mouse. It's not really Sherlock Holmes. Then after that, he did Without a Clue, which is a comedy version of Sherlock Holmes, but it's not really Sherlock Holmes. So this is like the closest he really got to do, maybe in some ways. And they all sound kind of similar. They're all scored with this kind of very romantic... I mean, it's a romantic but kind of gothic and grand at the same time. Beautiful score.
Oh, NATO.
I mean, they've got NATO in it as well. So they're really grounding it in a reality. And when they fly and they land, this is at Alexandra Palace. And that's a miniature at Christchurch, obviously. But
Think of the smoke from the helicopter. That was good.
But yeah, this is Alexandra Palace, and it was being refurbished at the time it was done. There's a lot of production value here, just stuff like soldiers marching along in the background and those kind of things, all these kind of cool details. I mean, look at what Kane's wearing. It just doesn't look English at all.
It's a raincoat, isn't it?
But a kind of Inspector Gadget style.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
Trench coat. This is a beautiful shot. Look at that. Wow. I love these actors too. They're so stiff.
People are kissing everyone. It's ridiculous.
But they're not really, though. They're running up to each other and kind of
awkwardly
avoiding all of the subtext.
Everyone's gone all flaky.
We have totally isolated London in order to stop further contagion. If that fails, and the surrounding areas are threatened... Yes?
Look at Peter Firth's eye acting in this. Face acting where he's got nothing to do, but he's in the frame.
We have this from General Ames in Brussels.
I'm going to look left. I'm going to look right.
It's like you're on a 3-shot. What we do? We're just listening.
Anything about the ship? The ship? The thing from Halley's Comet.
He could have picked his nose or something.
It parked itself in a geostationary orbit directly over London.
That's
Ooh.
spectacular, isn't it?
Look at that effect.
It's amazing. Listen to this sound here. Musical. That. You hear it? The glass?
Oh, yeah.
So that's an example of something that they did.
Is that what Henry Mancini did? He
Yeah.
provided extra atmospheric.
And they hand that
Stems.
over to the editor. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
How do you know that?
And here he's talking about again more exposition, talking about these are human souls. Da da da. This is happening for a reason. Da da da. I don't think it sinks in because it's such an abstract thing, and he's delivering dialogue for like whatever it is, 30 seconds to a minute. It's just too much. I don't think the audience. I think when you're watching, to ground all this down, the audience watching now, all they want is chaos to stop in London.
Yes.
When you're watching it, that's the kind of dramatic thrust of this push of this whole end of the third act.
Male vampire's collecting life energy. But he has to send it through her to get it up to the collector.
Got to send all the cells up to the big Willy.
But if you look here,
Over there,
this is
flashes
the way that Hooper does all of this developing movement. It's all intercut with these dissolves, which have to be sort of perfectly timed to match the frame of the anamorphic frame, and the aspect ratio. So things cut at the right, faces cut onto faces, and it's really well done.
She wants back the energy she gave.
Oh, yeah, because he's got a bit of her energy which he wants back.
Yeah.
And take on a new life form.
But when you hear that for the first time as an audience member, and he's
You
just talking and talking and talking and talking, it's like, it's not going in. I don't think anyone's listening to this. We hear the music telling us, something's getting worse, something's getting worse. That's my take anyway.
Well, yeah, because it's left it to the final. No, because he's been lying about what happened. You know, due to his own lust, he's now had to sort of come clean, and it's just. And when he comes clean, you're like, oh, okay. It's not like a big revelation, is it? You know what I mean? It's just like, oh, I've got a bit of her life force. She wants it back, and I've sort of got to go find her. And you know, he fancies the pants off her.
But there's a lot.
But you can't blame him.
This is all really well staged as well. All this gives me flashbacks to early memories in my life of the 80s. I don't know about you. Like the car, the Cortina that he drives. Or whatever it is.
Cortina, yeah.
With the can you remember just seeing like the old license plates, number plates, as we call them.
Oh,
in the
yeah.
UK. Is it a Cortina? I think it is. We all rode in one of those. We all saw them on the street. And look here, look at that great shot. Look on the left. There's the Tower of Bridge up there.
Oh yeah.
And that's the lake at Elstree. It's on the back lot.
Oh, God.
It's just a cutout that they've stuck.
That is mental.
Really creative. And as you said before, this was all created on a backlot set at Elstree Studios. And the thing with the backlot at Elstree is, and John Graysmark just knowing it inside out, kind of like he did with the set of Metropolis, the tiny set of Metropolis that he built for Superman 4. It's a lot of alleyways that you can, if you know how to, you can adapt them. So it's stuff, rather than building everything, you can use bits of walls of studios, you can hang things off, rather than going to, I mean, there's not long after this, they shot Young Sherlock Holmes, where they built another version of London, a Victorian version, but they built that on the kind of green backlot area of Elstree, where they built the Overlook Hotel from the Shining. See these buildings here, it says Parkinson Transport. This is all the studio.
Elstree Studios, yeah.
Yeah, and they've just adapted it. But it's really creative what's been done by Graysmark, because it saves a lot of money. But they're also really clever, Tobe Hooper and everyone else, in just being able to redress a lot of it as well. So there's a lot of what we've just seen. They've been driving down some of the same parts backwards and forwards, and just redressed and relit, and it just, you'd never know. This is a great jump cut.
Oh, I didn't notice that with her eyes before. There's kind of swirls in them.
Yeah. Okay, this is a mechanical arm that they've built here, radio controlled. In the original making of, you can see that it actually was a limb with remote control fingers on it. But in the film, the way that they shoot it and the way they cut it just there, it looks like you could have just had someone out of shot performing it with their own arm.
It's a waste of someone's time then.
But it's a great, not a jump cut, but a jump scare, sorry. It's a wonderful jump scare. But look at St. Paul's Cathedral here, the miniature. It doesn't look anything like St. Paul's Cathedral.
Oh, yeah.
But in that wide shot we saw earlier, you could clearly see on the right-hand side there was a brilliant St. Paul's Cathedral miniature. So maybe they just felt they couldn't use the real one. I don't know. Come up with their own one. Maybe they didn't want to. So this is all Elstree backlot, all this stuff here. There's a great website, I forget what it's called. Is it Cloud City or something? And they've got like dozens of photos or hundreds of photos of the set build for this movie. And it's just spectacular.
Now this is where he's going to encounter. We haven't. Oh, the other one got impaled by Finlay.
Vladi, yeah.
So the last one's going to appear now, and form into a big bat. But he's got. The ADR voice they've given him doesn't really work.
That's a bit.
It needed more work done. Or just a different voice, you know. It needs to sound a bit more demonic. It's all like, you can't go through, blah 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 blah. You know, just a very sort of generic voice. That's a good shot.
It's beautiful. That's front projection. The background.
Yeah.
And that's the stage at Elstree, stage 6, the big stage. And the outside of it's dressed as a cathedral. And this is back at Barnet House. This, if you look at this on Google Earth now, it just looks very 1960s. It's a very 1960s building. I think it's being turned into flats at the moment. But this is great. And it's all silence, and you can just hear Kane walking through. One of the sound designers they had on this film, who did the additional sound, who worked on a lot of the Bond films of this era, was a French sound editor called Jean-Pierre Lelong, I believe. And anyway, he was very well known and meticulous with Foley effects. And apparently before Pro Tools and things, he just knew how to sync things up kind of perfectly. But if in any of his films that he kind of did additional effects and stuff on, the Foley's just fantastic, and I think in this film it's brilliant. It really adds so much to it. And that backing that you mentioned before of
it's like the Fire of London, you know.
Yeah, there is some. That's the other thing about this film, right? And I didn't say this earlier. There's very much like a post-war feeling to it.
Definitely, yeah.
Like you can see a lot of the characters. I mean, you probably remember, like in that time, you had people who just reached retirement age who had been in the war, which just seems, it's time. Times moved on, but it was there were a lot more connections to it, and London and the world too. A lot of the architecture and stuff kind of hadn't quite moved on. And you get, although saying that, they're in this state-of-the-art facility inside. This Alan Hume's lighting here is fantastic. The way he walks in from the shadow, and the makeup looks great too. This is stunning. This looks so good. There's so much suspense here. It's so well done, so well directed. Don't you think that wide lenses with actors kind of quite close to them, but with the background and all this depth, it just looks so beautiful.
That is lush. That's very good. I don't know if they gave this a 70mm premiere or presentation. When I reviewed it a number of years back, I couldn't find any paper clippings that had it listed as that. But it wouldn't, it would kind of make sense for Canon to do that. But for their first big, massive blockbuster type movie.
Did it have a royal premiere?
No. I don't think so, no. I think only Superman 4 did.
Right. This is so good. The bubbling skin effect. It reminds me, that was a big thing, wasn't it, in the 80s?
Oh, yeah.
Where they put like bladders and stuff underneath the skin.
Yeah.
And it looks great. It looks so real.
Here I go.
But this is great. There's a lot of roto work as well, rotoscope work around the body. But the way that the practical effect interacts with the optical there is really beautiful. And the music here.
Very slick.
I miss scores like this so much. I really do.
I know, it's just, they don't want to do fun scores anymore. And it's got to be atmospheric and just samey.
That's so well lit. This looks like Blood and Black Lace as well.
Mm-hmm.
You see that flash of light?
Yeah, what was that from?
So later on, in the next scene, you see Coulson running past a car that blows up. They've used a couple of frames of that to create the effect of an explosion going off. They've dumped it in there. If you go frame by frame and look, I'm not kidding, it's there. Check it out. Do you think this is meant to be Bukowski, one of those zombies there?
Oh,
who just kind of disappeared?
They all look like they're about to laugh. Those performers, The
music here is just great.
One look like Johnny Ball,
And to praise Matilda May more as well with what she had to do. She is very alien-like in the film. She isn't playing it. She plays it better than it's written in the book as well too. She really is an entity. She's an entity. She's not a human being. I think she does it amazingly. It reminds me, I think you said this actually, it reminds me very much of like the performance of Arnold Schwarzenegger in The Terminator, or even better, Robert Patrick in Terminator 2.
Yes, there's a very sort of robotic movement to her.
Yeah.
Even though she has a sort of elegancy with her where she moves her hands, sort of
Grace.
sort of balletic sort of thing. So yeah, she's thought a lot about it and figured out how she should do it. And not just, she's obviously cast due to her how good she looks, but she's obviously brought something else to it, because you can't just, we're going to hire them because they're attractive, but you have to sort of have something else to them.
This music.
But is this her real voice? Is it dubbed over?
I imagine it's probably dubbed. That's such a great image, isn't it? That's gorgeous. See here when the car's about to when the car explodes, there's a few frames of this that they used.
Come on, it's like flips, doesn't it? Yeah. Boom! Look at that.
Now begins an amazing sequence. This is one of my. You know how people like stuff like they like the end of the Marvel movies, where I think the Avenger film, I hear people saying that's the most epic thing ever, or whatever. To me, this is my version of that. It's all visual. There's like no dialogue, and you're just watching Kane running around London, and it's the filmmaking is
That's
just spectacular.
Yeah, I love this bit. It's what you've been waiting for shit to hit the fan.
It's so well shot, so well staged. And the music, Henry Mancini just going for it. And I noticed this earlier, I showed you. Kane here, he's turning around looking at everything. On the right, there's a Prefab Sprout poster. Remember the 80s pop group? You go onto YouTube and type in Prefab Sprout, you'll be surprised. You'll think, what is the subtext here? What are they trying to say?
Hot dog jumping for...
I mean, this is so great, isn't it? Here, I love these shots where you've got the pulsating light that's coming from inside of that shop as everyone's running past, and it's just stunning tracking shot. And we mentioned about the
Chancery Lane. There you go.
Well, the post-war kind of element. One of the only things they did actually shoot in the city, by the way, is this underground bit, and this. Watching this in 1984, this looks like something from the Blitz, doesn't it?
Yeah,
it really does look like Blitz imagery. It's kind of scary. I mean, that's what I think of when I see it. It's stunning. The visual effects here.
All that paper everywhere.
Absolutely.
It's the bus. Boom. That is wonderful. Burn, you bastards. Eh. Even though they're kind of shooting, they're also trying to hide some of the sets because they're limited.
Mm-hmm.
But they still give it scale
on wide angles.
Yeah,
look at this great shot here as the light blasts across him. It's amazing. No, you're right. You're absolutely right. I think it was built knowing that Tobe Hooper was going to be using as much as he could.
Mm.
But then it all comes down with this dreadful ADR work.
It's Jimmy Carr.
The deepest voice you've ever heard.
Yeah.
So you've just had some of the most mind-blowing horror cinema spectacle, and then it's kind of all brought down by these silly lines.
News at 10,
I mean, this is spectacular as well.
Look at that. That's so cool. They should, like, when he turns into the big vampire, goes, "Rah!"
And that's actually a miniature.
His hair should go grey.
That's a forced perspective miniature that's
Really?
filmed in front of the set. Yeah.
Wow.
It's only
Looks amazing. It looks ginormous.
yeah, it's really well shot. This here, the piano keys, it's beautiful. The dirgy sound, I love it. So great. and yeah, this is beautiful, stunning. So this is stage 6 of Elstree Studios.
Yeah, repeat the shot again, but you get to see him interact with it.
Yeah.
I love this bit here because when he drops the sword and he impales and he stabs him from behind and gets himself, but they shoot up past Kane, don't they? And he sort of jolts back as it flies up, hits the roof. It goes, it's really cool sequence.
I think you could
Look
do
at that!
Yeah.
That's like 2001 stuff, you know.
And look at all the roto work around them as well, because there's no blue screens. They're all on the set. So everything that's going behind them, somebody's had to go and hand roto all of those.
I should have said that, yeah, you're one of us. And that was
Yeah.
kind of like when I went to Sweden and, you know, in the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they're now so they're bat people, right? These are bats.
Bad people.
I forgot that right. They are bat people. They're not humans.
Yeah.
So are they male and
Vampires.
female bats? And why? I mean, I would go with the weird. Why not cut in between and have like these two bats making out at the same time? Like,
Well,
really
you could do it like in Species, where Natasha Henstridge makes out with someone, and it cuts to the Giga-esque kind of design,
right?
and it's all like distorted imagery, and it works really well. So you could do something like that.
I just think there's such a rich idea with the idea of the life force passing through people and the idea of falling in love with someone and just becoming light energy and they travel into somebody else's body. I mean, it almost reminds me of something like Switch, the Blake Edwards movie, but as a horror. I think you could do so much with that, especially now, something to do with commenting on gender identity and those things too. But it's just very limited here. It's very limited. This is beautiful. This is really well shot.
Sorry, babe. Stepped in the back.
This is just breathtaking. This is goosebumps on the back of my neck. This whole sequence. This is all the angles, everything, the color, the use of color.
Have it there.
Look at that.
Boom.
The editing,
The sword. Yeah.
the sound effects. And this shot here, as it go up, and it all lights up.
Oh, look at that.
And that shot. Look at that.
Look at the detail on that. All the energy
Yeah.
going into it. It's crazy.
Are they babies at the bottom there?
Oh, I don't know.
Okay, one of my favourite shots ever, and the music and everything.
When you see it.
This shot here,
This one here.
wide angle, looking up. It's absolutely
And the score.
spectacular. Yeah, it's just goosebumps all over my face and back of my neck. Yeah, it's just hairs on end. And that miniature, I believe this stuff was shot in Elstree too, BBC Elstree. This was like 10 foot long, this miniature. It's really spectacular.
Massive.
Beautiful music. Tobe Hooper says when they made this film with Canon, you get to kind of bypass development and I guess gatekeepers and that kind of thing in your film being made. I'd say this film is an argument for gatekeepers and development. I think they really could have done something. But saying that, as I said, oh my goodness, I've got $30 million and I've convinced them that I can remake, that I can basically make a film which I'm going to turn into my version of Quatermass, the experiment, which I love. I'm going to go out there and do it. I think it's really spectacular, but it also has loads of problems as well at the same time. And, you know, things are interesting and can coexist. Because let's be honest, this isn't seen as a universally praised film. And
It's not, you know, renowned for its qualities, but I think most people that do see it go, I really enjoyed that. And it's usually people who hadn't seen it at the time, it's usually like 20 years later and go, wow, how did I miss this? You know, it's just a great guilty pleasure with a lot of, care and attention gone into its production. It's just like, it just didn't find, again, like most Cannon films, didn't find that right balance and sort of, I don't know, creating a product that's kind of difficult to sell and it's kind of very unique appeal to certain demographic and audience. I just wish Cannon, I just wish this movie was a little bit more successful and they could have made more wacky stuff like this.
Yeah.
That's what's kind of missing. That's what I always liked about Cannon, because they always had despite things done on the cheap and cutting corners, the films are always generally entertaining and just kind of strangely unique, and sometimes not really in a good way, but it also just kind of you sort of appreciated their approach anyway.
I miss the independent producers, like as you say, like those and the. I mean, I've never worked for them, and I was never in that environment. But there's a magic, I think, for us of a certain age, and many of you listening, watching the films of like Dino De Laurentiis or the Salkins or Cannon. They just feel these bizarre films that are funded in different ways, and therefore have somewhat more freedom to go nuts. And just just kind of out of control, and it's weird watching these anomalies that just couldn't really be made in a studio system.
Well, it's like, as you say, they have the freedom to go nuts, but then they sell them to a distributor, and then they butcher them, even more, make it even worse,
But just to have those stories to speak of, I guess, is kind of fun.
Well, for sure. Yeah, TriStar didn't seem to be sort of butchering quite a few films actually. Right. In that period. But Supergirl got butchered as well.
Oh, yeah.
By TriStar.
No, it's a really beautiful print as well.
It's just a shame that only the theatrical cut is available in 4K and not the international one, which is a shame. Well, folks, hope you enjoyed this commentary. I will be back with some more very soon. Take care of yourselves, and goodbye for now.
Goodbye.